Um, Good evening, everyone. We are expecting a number of additional people, although we also know that some folks will be watching the recording. So I'm going to get started just because our time is quite limited. I'm Kate Good. I'm the Executive Director of the Parish Resource Center, and I'm so glad for you to show up this evening for this Meet the Faculty event. And it's a half an hour in length, so we'll try and keep it moving. But I just wanted to give you all just a brief overview. We had some questions that were fairly specific. So I will start with that. And if you have questions, you should feel free to unmute yourself and just ask them or chat them to me. And then as soon as I'm done, I'll turn it over to the faculty to answer questions as well and also introduce themselves. So thanks for coming tonight, and we're going to get started. All right, is that showing up as it should? All right, so the Kairos Spiritual Direction Training Program has been, I think, active and training students for about 28 years. So Jean or Eldon or Julia or Amy, you might know specifically better than I, but we made some changes this year based on student feedback. And first, the training will be taking place at Raider Park, which is actually in Lancaster. I'm realizing we didn't correct that typo. So it will be just very close to where our offices are located, but it's a beautiful contemplative setting. There's a pond and lots of walking trails, so it will be a lovely space. The in-person time has been shortened to 1 day per month. Previously, it was a day and a half, and we will also offer it by Zoom simultaneously, so it'll be a hybrid option. We do have at least one student from out of state who will be taking advantage of that. Supervision training will be done by Zoom to allow for a more flexible schedule for students, and that will be scheduled throughout the month based on student and faculty schedules. And then we are having a very diverse slate of guest experts who will be teaching on Saturdays in their areas of expertise. And we have a wonderful group of folks. You can see a current list on our website, and we keep adding new folks. So we're really excited about that. We had a couple of questions about pricing, and I'll send this PowerPoint out. This is all also on our website. There is an early bird price that is through November 31st. And you can see the cost there for the 2 years of the program. We offer either a monthly payment option or a yearly payment option. And so that setup is also outlined on this slide. And then some folks have asked about how much of a time commitment it is. There's, as I mentioned, one in-person or online Saturday per month. There's a 2-hour Zoom small group meeting per month. And while supervision begins well into the program, you'll be meeting as a small group prior to supervision as well. There will be a 15-minute contemplative practice video per month to help you have contemplative time outside of the Saturday time. 5 to 6 hours of reading per month. And I brought some of the books along, which you probably won't be able to see with me being on a small screen, but they're not substantial in length. And they're books that we think that will be fun to read. They're not heavy textbooks. And so about 5 to 6 hours of reading per month. And then starting in September 2022, you will give 1 or 2 spiritual direction sessions per month at 45 to 60 minutes each. Some folks have also asked about who has been part of the student body in the past. So we gave some examples of students that we've had recently. We had a nurse join the program who was searching to address the limitations of traditional clinical work and acknowledge patient spiritual life. Someone who had just recently come out of homelessness and was working to deepen their own spiritual life while improving their ability to walk with others from a similar circumstance on their journeys. A therapist who was broadening their holistic practice. a pastor complementing their seminary training, a church administrative assistant who was stepping into ministry. We had a university dean who wanted to have a better connection with students and their spiritual life and also improve their listening skills, and a nutritionist seeking to be more in tune with their clients, and then somebody who wanted to offer spiritual direction as a part-time career. So really spanning a lot of different needs and interests and professional development as well. We often get asked what traditions the faculty, guest experts, and past and current students come from. And as you can see, it's a wide range of both Christian denominations, as well as Islam, Judaism, and then we have had students and faculty who are not part of any specific faith community. So that's a quick overview. I realize I'm probably going kind of quickly because we have a lot that we want to cover with the faculty tonight. So I will turn it over to you all. And again, if you have questions as we go, please feel free to just chat them or unmute yourself and ask a question. So I think Julia, you are up first. She'll introduce herself and tell her a little bit about her journey to being a spiritual director, talk about what draws her to teach SDT, and then answer a more specific question.
Good evening, everyone. And thank you for asking me to be first. But anyway, I can honestly say, I think others saw it in me before I would admit it for myself. In 2003, I started going to Kairos School of Spiritual Formation, which was housed at the Jesuit Center. And I went through all 3 years and, all the offerings. They had silent retreats. And I would every now and then have the question posed, well, when are you going into spiritual direction? And I said, never, was the first question. But then there was a part of me that knew that I would, when the time was right. And the time was right for me in 2016. However, my experience in nursing always made me aware that I was in touch or wanted to be in touch and respond to the spiritual needs of my patients, especially those who were disenfranchised by language, especially those who have strokes. I did a lot of work in rehab and they weren't able to communicate verbally. So I had to learn how to read body language and whatever way they could communicate. So it put me in touch with them on a different level than one would normally expect. So that's part of it. I guess I finally just surrendered to what I knew I needed to do. And I'm grateful that I did. Life is much better for me. Also, I'd like to add, I was a hospice nurse. My last full-time clinical position was as a hospice nurse, and clearly that put me in a position to be sensitive to listen to people dealing with the issues of end of life, and also make me appreciate living in a way that I'm sure I wouldn't have any other way. So how did I become part of the faculty? Again, someone just came up to me and said, Julia, I think you would be good at this. And I said, no. And so I said, okay, well, we'll try. And I actually enjoy it. I come to love the students. I feel privileged that along with Eldon, and I've learned I will do nothing with it in this area without him. So as long as he's at it, I'll be in it. But the group of students we have are so hungry and thirsty for their own spiritual growth and development, they are also so very humble and recognizing that in order to journey with someone, to support someone, that they want and desire all the training they can get so that they can be effective. So there's for Julia.
And Julia, a specific question to answer, because you do a lot of work in your current role around cultural humility and how to work across cultural differences, and how does spiritual direction impact that work, if at all?
When I read the question on the post on the email, the scripture that came to my mind was Jesus's encounter with Nathaniel, and it's recorded in the Gospel of John. And when Jesus came up to him, he says to Nathaniel, "Oh, behold, the Israelite in whom there is no guile." And I've come to understand that as a person that has no hidden agenda, a person who's willing to be open to the authentic in themselves and others, a person who you can feel comfortable in around to bear your soul, a person who you can share the most intimate, even fearful things in your life, in your past. And so you can find that in a spiritual director. Now, culturally, everyone who is human, who bears the stamp of God, qualifies to sit with a spiritual director and be authentically themselves. So culture really is secondary to being humble before that person, recognizing who they are. And it's an honor that they would trust you enough to be so open and to bear their souls to you. So that's how I see that. The cultural part, you get to learn their culture. That can be fun. That's the icing on the cake. But initially it's encountering that soul, that image bearer of God, one-to-one.
Thank you. That's beautiful. Amy, would you introduce yourself? And then I have a specific question for you.
Sure. My name is Amy Shutt, and I came to spiritual direction about 20 years ago, in a time in my life when I was really in need of some deep healing. And I was accompanied by a spiritual director, and I continue with a spiritual director all these many years. I consider it part of my prayer life, my contemplative way of looking for spirit or God in my life. And my path towards to be a spiritual director kind of evolved through my meetings with my spiritual director. There was a time in my life when I was in need of rest. And so she recommended a retreat facility, and that's how I came in contact with Kairos. And I realized that through participating in spiritual direction as a directee, I was just always so awestruck at how God moved in my life and how present God really is with me. And so I was very drawn to the idea of bearing witness to this in the lives of other people. And it's just always a privilege for me to companion someone. And I am always awestruck at God's movement in the lives of human beings. And that's just how I come to the practice.
Thank you. And how did you decide to become a faculty member of the current program?
It's kind of a selfish motivation, I do have to say, I have always prized myself as a student, and I enjoy learning more. And I know that my time in direction training was extremely formative. And so when the offer came to participate as part of the faculty, I realized I would need a little bit more training, which I've already started that. And I knew that that would be also energizing for my own spiritual formation. And the thought of accompanying other people and this is another draw for me to bear witness to God's movement in your lives.
Thank you. And you are an engineer by training and profession. Do you see any overlap between spiritual direction and engineering?
Actually, I do. I mean, I think some of the skills that I use are the deep listening skills and the discernment skills. Engineers we have to use those kinds of skills every day. But the other kind of mystery that appeals to me is that as a mechanical engineer, I'm always bearing witness to unseen forces on the move in the world. And spiritual direction is exactly the same kind of thing as looking for God's movement, the unseen spirit at work in the world. And so, that's on one level. On another level, it really does, my direction skills really do help me deepen my relationships with my coworkers, my peers, and my clients that I work for. And when I pay attention to, being moved towards compassion, when somebody's sharing a story, it always causes me to pause and invest a little more time in that conversation, which maybe without the direction training, I would not have done.
Thank you. That's very helpful. Eldon, could you please introduce yourself and also tell us a little bit about why you became a faculty member for the spiritual direction training program?
Sure. My name is Eldon Fry. I grew up in the Bitterroot Mountains of Idaho. So very early on, became a person familiar and welcoming to silence and solitude. So spiritual direction seemed to be kind of a natural outgrowth of some of that, but also experienced the movement of God at a time when I would have been self-described as an atheist, just didn't believe in God. And then these experiences happened that I had no framework for. Ultimately, I then moved on into a reluctant pastoral calling and pastored churches and saw some significant changes take in people's lives. But these were typically in university and college contexts. And so a lot of the people I was interacting with had large questions about life. That moved me toward a doctorate in pastoral counseling. But I realized that counseling sometimes is trying to help people get from A to B, and there can be too much Eldon in that process. And so I began to look around and actually attended a week-long training in group spiritual direction. And through that time, I became aware of people who actually were serving as spiritual directors and had a significant experience through that week that really helped shape and open myself. And then a dear friend, a longtime accountability person for, I think right now we're getting close to 40 years, understood about this program at Kairos and said, why don't we go together? We could enjoy that time together. And so we began to do that. And he is much more a consultant person, but I got hooked by spiritual direction. And particularly working with young people, I found it really helpful that when they walked out of my office, it wasn't what Eldon was telling them to do, that there was this embracing of a movement of God within themselves. And I felt like that served them better through the years. It's also been interesting that that's been a process even now at my age, with conversations of people who are retiring or even facing disease that could very well take their lives, and in all probability may, and walking with them through that experience, realizing they're asking some of the same questions that the young people in college and university were asking. What is the meaning of life? What is it that I should be putting energy into? And helping provide a space where they can sit with that. That's a good spiritual direction term, but to sit with it, reflect on it, and allow God to speak into that inner moving, I think is really important. I just went to the Global Leadership Summit, and people from all over the world were speaking this year. And many of them referred to that some kind of inner movement where they knew something was just right. And they would reject some of the other opportunities because they felt there was something inside that affirmed this. And so I realized that it's one of those things that can be a guiding light for our lives. And so the opportunity to work with Kairos has been a real privilege. I led a small group of pastors after graduating from the Kairos program, and then continued to meet with people. And then there were pastors and church leaders who started asking to meet with me while I was still on the university campus. And they would ask to meet early in the morning. And as I ran it by my vice president, she said, there really isn't a big demand by students at 7:30 in the morning. If you want to talk to a pastor at that point, just go for it. And that was part of what's continued to grow in my heart and my life. And again, a very interdenominational, even with people who at this point are struggling, whether there's any belief system in their lives. So Kairos just seemed to be an outgrowth of that. And what a privilege it is, first of all, to work with Julia, and we just have more fun than spiritual directors should have. And on the other side of it is that it actually is investing in people so that this doesn't just stop if I die. Which is something that's really, really important to me. I think just on a practical basis, that's probably a long enough story, but you'll get more stories than you probably want to hear from a person who's experienced life as I have. But on the other side of that is, I was reflecting a bit on the question about how I've walked with people through a discernment process. I think there are several things that have been really important in learning around discernment. One of those is that people make a lot of decisions, and it really is important and a gift of trust for them to invite me to walk along with them in that process and to prayerfully be a part of their journey, not controlling their journey, but walking with them and asking the right questions, perhaps, to allow them to discover God in some significant ways. And I think the listening piece has become really important. And that's one of the things that we hear people being called to in these leadership programs is, well, we need some deep listeners in today's world for sure, because we don't hear each other very well. And then I've had the opportunity to mentor young people a bit in working with this. And I just got an email right before we went on from a young man who now lives in Bolivia, and just realizing that the interaction that we had a few years ago is still important enough to him that he would reach out and say, Eldon, can we Zoom for a few minutes and talk about life together? And he doesn't expect me to have answers, but has privileged me to walk along beside him. And I'm really, really grateful for that.
Thank you, Eldon. That's wonderful. Jean, if you could introduce yourself and talk about you're a new kind of faculty for this program.
I'm Jean Leniker, and yes, I am probably the most recent. However, I've been connected to Kairos School of Spiritual Formation since its, I think, second year of inception. And there is where I encountered my first spiritual director some 30 or I don't know, 20 years ago. And it was a time in my life in my early 40s when my external world was very chaotic and busy and full, parenting 5 children. What I didn't realize was my internal world was just as messy and chaotic and in disarray. And so Kairos offered this stepping away and an opportunity to begin to notice and to be attentive and lovingly attentive to my inner world. I went through the 3-year program there, and then I moved on and completed my graduate work, and then came back in the capacity of teaching deepening prayer and the contemplative life. Also did some healing retreats along the way. And so here I am. As you may or may not know, Kairos/Jesuit Center has that phase of life has ended. And so I did the grief work, grieving that loss, and then found myself kind of being asked if I would consider this new role. I'm excited about this. First of all, that the Parish Resource Center sees it as a vital a part of the program. Basically, we get to practice what we preach, and that's such an important part of the training, spiritual direction. Our learners, we are learning. I cannot recall the person who said that spiritual direction is really just about one person showing another where to find bread. And so there is a template for the contemplative part of this program, but we also will create this as we go. Nothing is in stone, and the contemplative life and its riches and its fullness and the depths, the unknown, the mystery. And we get to co-create this with the divine. And that's exciting. The other piece is we are living in really turbulent times. And so we need to find our grounding. One thing that I've noticed that is changing, kind of just sitting, doing long retreats, a week of retreat or a month of retreat, a lot of sitting and gazing, and is not working for some folks, and they need to move because there's so much frantic energy in the world. So we'll practice as we go. But it will be a significant part of the day, and then also getting to practice until it becomes integrated into all of life, and we become this presence that changes changes people in our room, the people in our workplace, with or without words. It's more about presence.
Thank you. And just for those of you who haven't had a chance to look at the schedule, for the Saturdays, there will be contemplative time as well as teaching time, and then contemplative time during the month in between as well. So we're really excited about that. We're a little short on time, but if you all are willing, we can stay on for a little bit longer if you folks have questions or anything that would be helpful to understand.
Read in the description that there's opportunity, I think in the practice of spiritual direction to be connected with some marginalized communities and marginalized peoples. And I'm just wondering if you could speak more to what that would look like, or how that works and how that is part of the program.
Sure, thank you. So Parish Resource Center, which is the organization that runs this program, We do a lot of work as well within the Lancaster community around food insecurity and immigration. And so what we know is that listening and accompanying people, and you can see my large dog in the background, is an important part of what spiritual direction can offer. And we also have seen through many of the students who participate that they're coming to spiritual direction, not necessarily to be a traditional director, but because they want to be better listeners in their own settings. And so it feels really important to us to move spiritual direction into settings where it's not about what you can afford and your access, but that you have the presence of people who are committed to deep and non-judgmental listening. And so that will be a part of the second year. And we can either create spaces for students, or if you have a space in your job or in your own community that you want to practice spiritual direction, that is also possible.
Thank you.
Other questions?
Can you explain what deep listening is? I've heard that term over and over, and it intrigues me, but I really don't know what it is.
Faculty, which of you would like to respond?
Well, I don't want to assume the male responds the first, so I look to Julia because she is very articulate and is a person who does deep listening. I think deep listening is, at least for me, it is that space where I prayerfully hold what is said, but also allow God to speak about what might be behind what is said or underneath, however you want to say that. That if someone says they're fine, there's probably something else underneath that statement. And can I listen carefully enough to hear that and join with them in terms of addressing that? So that, and then part of it just is deep listening is it's the Yogi Bear statement, is just showing up, is that there's somebody who's actually there for someone to listen. I think that is something that over and over again is expressed by people who do direction with is, I'm just so thankful to have someone who actually listens to me. I don't know if that's helpful or not, but that at least would be my understanding.
Jane, did you have something as well?
Were you talking to me?
No, you said Jane.
Sorry, I thought,
Yeah.
yeah.
I think Eldon summarized quite nicely. So much of it is about getting out of the way. And even in the silence, there is deep listening. It is not all about words, but in the silence, listening for the movement, listening for block, where might be stuck, listening, noticing there's sort of in the spiritual direction session, there's two stories going on, the directors and the directee, for lack of better words. We have both of our stories, and then kind of letting that go so the divine, something much greater and deeper can transform the moment. And all we can do is say, wow.
Thank you. Other questions?
I have a couple questions. I think can you hear me? Okay. I think
Yes.
when I first started looking online at this program, it was before the pandemic, and it was like a Friday evening, all day Saturday.
Mhm.
Do you envision that it would ever go back to that, or is this like a temporary pattern? I mean, I know that's a ridiculous thing to ask in the middle of the pandemic.
That's a good question.
I'm not even sure why I'm asking it. Yeah, I guess if you join this in March, this format would be the format for the 2 years. Maybe that's a better question.
Yeah, It's actually the same time amount or a little bit more the way that we've reformulated, and it will be this way the entire cohort. We had so PRC sort of assumed responsibility for Kairos 2 years ago, and we had many younger students attending, many who had children and had jobs, and so asking folks to spend the night or giving up a portion of their workday just made it hard for a lot of the students who were participating. So our interest was in keeping the same amount of teaching time, but making it perhaps hopefully more accessible to folks. And so that's where the dividing of what was Friday afternoon into evening into another time during the month that's convenient for folks. And it might be a Friday evening for some of the students. From this all-day Saturday just made a lot more sense. Asking people to spend the night for 18 weekends just wasn't really as feasible as we had hoped. So we're in the middle of a pandemic, and the last weekend of in-person with the first cohort happened the weekend that everything shut down. So we in the middle of that weekend had to send everybody home, and then we're on Zoom until almost a year later. But we hope that this is a format that we will continue. We will continue this format, and it allows us the flexibility, especially during COVID, to know that we can move things online if we have to. And we will have some students who are online the whole time, but also students meeting in person if we're able to do safely. Did I answer your question? Other questions? Well, we're over our time, and I want to be sensitive to everybody's time. But if you have additional questions afterwards, or as you're thinking about this evening, please feel free to reach out to us at the Parish Resource Center. We're very easy to reach by phone or email. And if you have a specific question for a faculty member, please just let us know, and we're happy to connect you so that you can have a more in-depth conversation with them. So I really am grateful for everybody showing up this evening. Thanks to the faculty for giving us this time. And yeah, we will send out a recording and also links to the updated website and pages with the experts. And please reach out as you have questions. Thank you so much.
Yeah.